Yes, guys, Adelaide can win the premiership in 2025. I've just sat down and watched the practice game against Port Adelaide. Now, obviously, it's just a preseason game, so I'm getting way ahead of myself there, but it does have to be taken into consideration some of the players that Adelaide have brought into the lineup this season. The fact that we expected them to play finals last season, and they sort of had a dip year, a below par year, and now if they can put everything together this season, I do honestly think they are a serious chance of contending, at least pushing for that top four if they get everything right in 2025. So a different story for Port Adelaide, and I do know that there's a lot of sort of extenuating circumstances around this game. Port Adelaide had a lot of their key position defenders out, which made things a lot easier for the Crows, but it was there was a lot to like from an Adelaide perspective, and particularly some of the things that I've been critical about the Crows throughout probably the last couple of seasons. They look like they've got some solutions to those problems if they make some correct choices throughout this season. So Matthew Nicks has a lot to get right, but I think they can if they don't get too many injuries and they make some selection issues that they can kind of hit upon here. So I'm kind of going to anchor this video mostly around the Crows, but I'll talk a little bit about Port Adelaide too, because I think they've got some really, fun things to talk about throughout the 2025 season. But I want to anchor everything to the idea that we're going to be talking about performances from this game as like our main thing. We're going to be talking about best 23 and what this game means for the best 23 come round one this season, and also some issues and solutions that both of these teams have to solve and can kind of, get right over the next few weeks before the season starts. So we'll kick in with the beginning of this game. Obviously, Adelaide running that midfield group without players like Rankin, Cumming, who looks to be sort of settling in on a wing at the moment. So Cumming, obviously a big upgrade there for some of the wingers that I think have been kind of holding them back a little bit over the last couple of seasons. For Port Adelaide, it was all about those key position players. And I think for a team like Port Adelaide, who probably already lack talent in their key position stocks, having Asava Radigalia, Brandon Zerk-Thatcher and Todd Marshall out of the team is a significant hit, even if it is only a pre-season game. So those are the acknowledgements. As far as how Adelaide stacked up in that midfield group, it was pretty much, O'Brien was taking a large percentage of the hit-outs. And this is probably the first place I want to start with Adelaide, because I have been critical about probably the fact that they've played players like Matt Crouch and Rory Laird. I've been pretty vocal about that over the last sort of 6 months or so with how I think they need to move on from those players. I will say that if you look at the numbers for Adelaide and the amount of stoppages they have in their games, the game style is largely built around the fact that they have a ruckman like Riley O'Brien. And I think Riley O'Brien sort of brings Matt Crouch into the game plan. So I do sort of see how they're intrinsically linked. I think in a perfect world, Adelaide would be playing a much more transition style ruckman, someone that can get the ball on the outside as well as the inside. But Riley O'Brien is pretty much all the Crows have. They didn't pick up someone like a Taylor Goad in the draft a couple of years ago. They didn't get Dodson this season. So Riley O'Brien is the only card that they're able to play. And what Riley O'Brien does best is win hit-outs to advantage. And that's where you look at midfielders, players like Matt Crouch, who can sort of get first hands on the ball, with a ruckman like Riley O'Brien, who can get those sort of deft touch, delicate taps down to a player like Crouch, who's one of the best sort of loose ball players from stoppage. So they're pretty intrinsically linked is what I'm trying to say. And I think Matt Crouch is going to be staying there for the 2025 season. So I've sort of made my peace with that. I think it's about the other players for Adelaide, though, that can maybe improve in this midfield, which will facilitate someone like a Jordan Dawson maybe being able to play in a different position. So we'll talk about that as the video goes along. The midfield group was, as I said, Crouch in there, Soligo, Peatling, Dawson and Draper were sort of the main ones that sort of were coming in and out of that midfield. So it's still maybe a little bit too early to tell who they're going to be playing in there as that sort of starting group. But it does beg the question about Dawson. Like, could he go back and play that sort of sweeping half-back role, a position that Adelaide haven't really had, an A-grade talent in since Dawson has made that move into the midfield? Dawson, he's such a flexible, versatile player. He could probably play in the forward half of the ground. He could probably play in the back half of the ground. He can also play as a big-bodied, lethal weapon from the midfield as well. So they've got a lot of decisions to make there, but I could see the midfield lining up, the starting midfield at least, Soligo, Peatling and Isaac Rankin when he's fit. He obviously didn't play in this game, and that would facilitate someone like a Jordan Dawson who has that little bit more bite in his game, the beautiful kicking inside 50. Maybe he can drop a little bit deeper and sort of set up play from back there, because that is an area that Adelaide lack. But in this game, the big standout has to be talking about Jake Soligo. He looked dynamic, he looked explosive, he looked a lot stronger than he did last season. And last season was a breakout season for Jake Soligo. It was his first full season as a genuine out-and-out midfielder. And it looks to me like he has taken another step again. And if he can be that sort of bullocking, strong, tough inside midfielder that he looked like against Port Adelaide yesterday, I don't see why you can't play, a fast, fleet-footed midfielder like Isaac Rankin and then a defensive midfielder like James Peatling and have those as your main midfield three. Have players like Crouch come off the bench to sort of win you stoppages and get you some, like a bit of a foothold in the territory game as well. So I really like that. And then you've got Sid Draper, who just has that class, that polish, and also the dynamism that you need. He's going to take a little bit of time, obviously, to start really impacting games. But already from what we've seen in the preseason so far, he is looking pretty good. So obviously, you've still got Dawson in that midfield conversation, but I want to, sort of preface this video against the idea that you could move him behind the ball, and we're going to talk about that as it goes on. From a wing perspective, as I said off the top, you're missing Isaac Cumming, which I assume that's why they were playing someone like a Chase Jones on that wing. I'm not a massive fan of Chase Jones. Again, did a North Melbourne video today after their preseason match against the D's, and just talking about those players like Darcy Tucker and McDonald and Bailey Scott, those sort of players. I think Chase Jones is probably the perfect example of Adelaide's version of that, where he's been in the system for a while, he's got some experience, he's easy enough just to stick there on the wing, but what does he do that actually creates headaches for the opposition? I'm not too sure. So I would rather be getting someone in there like an Isaac Cumming if you're not using him behind the ball, or even bringing someone like a Luke Nankervis who came into this game in the second half and did some nice things, but he's probably going to have to get a decent run at it to actually pick up some form if they want him to play well in the team. Billy Dowling was the other one, and I'd like to see him stay there. I think he offers a lot. He's got that sort of youthful exuberance to him. He's got really good running ability, and he looks like he has a decent overhead game from what we saw of him playing as a bit more of a high half forward last season. So he's got the contest side of his game really good, and also that running ability that helps on the wing. Can he kick the ball inside 50? He's not a D'Ambrosio, he's not an Errol Goulden perhaps, but he's got some skills there, and I'd like to see him given a go to see what he can do. From a forward perspective, this is what the thumbnail saying, can Adelaide win the premiership? Even floating that question probably sounds a little bit ridiculous. They haven't even made the finals in the last couple of seasons, but this forward line is a potential premiership winning forward line. Alex Neil-Bullen is the perfect high half forward. I've already seen him do in the match sim last week and then this game today. He's coming up to stoppage, he's impacting, he's adding a little bit more physicality into the contest, and then he spreads, he gets out and he takes those marks in the pockets, and he kicks the ball really well inside forward 50. So he has been a massive supercharge to this already, I think, stacked, as far as talent goes, and particularly in the forward half of the ground. He has made this even better. Ben Keys, he runs all day, he creates a contest, and when Adelaide are moving the ball quickly from the defensive half and they get it in to some of those, key position sort of contests, Ben Keys is always at the foot of those. He's always winning those balls. And if he gets a little bit of space in behind at goal, he can run on and kick. That's what he loves that. He always runs into those open goals. And I think he is going to be brilliant again alongside Alex Neil-Bullen as the two high half forwards. They can both get up to stoppage and impact there. The other one was Dan Curtin. So you've sort of got an interesting forward line because you're essentially going with Tex as that sort of bear in the square, big key position forward that's sort of a target man. You've got Thilthorpe, who's a little bit more roaming. You've got Darcy Fogarty as that third tall. And then they're also running Dan Curtin at the moment. So they've sort of got basically a four-tall forward line with those sorts of players. But because Dan Curtin and Fogarty give so much at ground level, I think this forward line works. And then you get the worker bees of Alex Neil-Bullen and Ben Keys. Very modular. I really like what they're doing in the forward half of the ground, and they looked dangerous. And I like the fact that Adelaide could sort of go through different modes of play in this game. They played some moments where they were just chipping it around and keeping control of the ball when, that's a really good way of conserving energy throughout a game. And then they were able to play really direct, fast, and get it down to these forwards as well. So something to watch with them. But that forward line, if you inject a Josh Rochelle in there as well, which we saw a little bit today. He had some moments where he was able to kick goals. Some of the midfielders start kicking goals, and then you get an Isaac Rankin down there to rest forward. It's going to be super, super dangerous. And I don't see a defence in the competition that is able to live with that forward line consistently throughout the year. Now, the defenders are interesting because they certainly lack talent in their ball movers. And this is where I think things are going to break down for Adelaide when they really want to transition the football. I mentioned the Riley O'Brien factor and how they have to sort of play around his skill set because they don't have that transition ruckman. They almost lose an extra runner on the field because of him. I think Josh Worrell, Nick Murray, and Mark Keane, I think that is enough for your key position players. Worrell looks like he's taken another step in his game and he's starting to intercept the football a lot more. I love what Mark Keane does from an intercepting point of view as well. And he can play tall and he can play small and he's got that sort of flexibility about him. And then you've got Nick Murray as just that, solid key position lockdown player as well. And he even looks like he's sort of muscled up a little bit more and has the ability to play on some of those key position forwards, albeit they were playing Port Adelaide today, who had a pretty understrength key position forward line themselves. So I'm not taking that all off this game. I watched the match sim game last week as well, and they just look like those forwards who are playing up against in training throughout the preseason, they're playing up forwards, really high-end forwards now, like Thilthorpe, like Tex Walker, like Fogarty. They're going to be getting a lot stronger and a lot better at just containing those high-end key position forwards. So I like what they're doing. It just brings into the conversation about Jordan Dawson here. So you've got, for the small defenders, they're running at the moment Mitch Hinge, who had a really good season last year. I like his dynamism off the back, the run that he drives the legs out of that back 50, gets a lot of rebound 50s and sort of pumps them up the ground a little bit. But he probably doesn't have that surgical kicking that some of the competition's best halfbacks have. And that really gives you the ability to either play long, play through the corridor, play really directly, and also to be able to control the ball in different phases of the game. I don't think Mitch Hinge really has that. Probably the one of this back three small defenders that does have it is a Wayne Millerer. I think he looks really sure on the ball, and he does have that ability to drive his legs as well and sort of get out of there and just take meters and sometimes progress them up the field in a non-pretty way. Rory Laird's the other one here. So I don't know. I don't really know what Rory Laird does as a halfback. I know he is an All-Australian halfback in years gone by. At the moment, though, he just sort of, he chips the ball into the pockets. I know teams were playing a lot more like that back 5 to 10 years ago. I think there's a lot more directness in the way teams want to play. They want to hit the corridor. Rory Laird doesn't do that. He's not an amazing kicker to football. He's probably going to win some ground ball and some contest stuff down there, but I think he's going to turn it over and fans are going to get a little bit sick of him being down there at times. So what I would sort of like to see here is a bit of a bold move with Jordan Dawson. And this does hinge on how the midfield is working out for the Crows coming into the season in those opening rounds. But if you get a really big bump out of Jake Soligo, like it looks like we're going to have, like today, he was clearly the best player on the ground for me. If he goes to another level, you've already got your best player in Isaac Rankin, who's looking like he's going to increase that midfield time. He's got the fast feet. You've got James Peatling from the Giants coming in here. He's a massive upgrade and he moves so well. And then Matt Crouch and Sid Draper, you've probably got enough midfield depth there, although you lose the big body in Jordan Dawson. And I know he has played some roles on some bigger body players, Bontempelli and Cripps and those sorts, and he's got that dagger of a left foot. But if you could put him behind the ball, give yourself another intercepting option, and then what Jordan Dawson can do with ball in hand compared to, say, a Hinge, a Laird or a Millerer, I just think that would supercharge the Crows so much. And how versatile Dawson is, he could even go a little bit forward of the ball as well. He'd just be a nightmare matchup for opposition coaches. They wouldn't have anything that they could do with him. You got Dan Curtin as that other sort of swing man that can go behind the ball, play in the forward line. They could swap and just create headaches for opposition coaches. So I would love to see that. I think the other element of this team is probably just the wings. I think Cumming makes that better, but we'll kind of have to see that. I don't really want to see Chase Jones playing on the outside. I think they can really elevate that by playing players like Dowling, playing players like Isaac Cumming there. So that's a bit of a watch, but that is the Adelaide portion of this video. We'll move on to the power, and they look like they've settled on Jordan Sweet as their number one ruck. They were pretty well, steadily playing that midfield group of Butters, Rosie, and Jason Horne-Francis. Most of 2024, they spent the season sort of playing Willem Drew as one of those midfielders. So I think they probably will do that when the season proper kicks in. But you're obviously, again, you're not really running those defensive roles and tags. So they're probably just wanting to get midfield minutes into the likes of those three superstars that they have there. Jason Horne-Francis, once again, he just looks primed to have a massive, massive season. He's so dynamic with ball in hand. And I've mentioned it a few times now in videos, how deadly he looks and how likely he looks at stoppages, at getting hold of the ball. And then, once he gets it, he's going to drive the legs and he's going to be hard to stop. The others going through there were Ollie Wines, Willem Drew, and Jackson Mead was the other one. I think Mead had a pretty average day and just doesn't really look like he's taken any steps to sort of improve his game at this point. Whether he plays as a half forward, a winger, or he does get some time through that midfield, time will tell. I think when they're full strength, he could potentially be missing out though. On the wings, I liked what Jace Burgoyne did. He didn't get a heap of the football, but he was pretty poised with it. And we know what he's like just from a contest point of view. He runs so hard, he gets out into space and he uses the footy so well. Travis Boak was sort of operating off the other wing as well. So interesting there. I don't really like Travis Boak necessarily playing wide of the contest. I'd probably prefer him as playing like a high half forward and he can come up to stoppage and be a little bit more on the inside and use his physical traits as well. But that's sort of where he was mostly operating in this game. I think the one area where Port Adelaide look like they potentially have taken the next step is those small forward ranks. It was an area for me that they just didn't really have any cut through last season. The ball went to ground and there wasn't much down there. But Willie Rioli, ever since that final series last year, looks like he's just playing really good football. He kicks the ball so well inside 50, so if he picks it up around that arc, look out for the opposition. Sam Powell-Pepper brings that physicality that I just mentioned about Travis Boak. He brings that and sort of scares those opposition defences. If you get a poor kicking key position defender and Sam Powell-Pepper is on the scene, he will tackle you. And then you've got players like Darcy Byrne-Jones. Joe Richards has come into the team and he gets a little bit higher up the field and sort of works into that midfield. So you get extra runners, create overloads on the opposition. And Joe Berry just looks like an absolute star. If there's one thing that I hope happens for Port Adelaide this season, it is that Joe Berry wins the Rising Star. I just think he looks so calm at AFL level. He already looks like players that are playing in the game at the moment when he gets the football. That's probably the best compliment that I can pay him at the moment. He moves so well and he's probably not going to get, the Levi Ashcroft, Jagger Smith kind of touches, but he's going to just pick up the ball around that 50 and hit targets. And he did that today plenty of times. Georgiades, loquacious with the two key position forwards. So of course Marshall is missing. And they did look a little bit impotent in the air and that played into that narrative I was talking about with the Crows. Perhaps their intercepting defenders looked a little bit better than they are because of the smalls in this forward line. There were a lot. Ollie Lord came in the second half and had a couple of nice moments, but perhaps you wouldn't see him getting in ahead of those other three. I think Lukosius, one thing I did notice about him is when he marked the ball outside 50, he was able to turn and hit targets. And that's probably something that Port Adelaide will need if they don't get sort of extra effort out of those small forwards kicking the ball inside 50. Lukosius is another weapon in that area. So you want him sort of picking up the ball a little bit higher, not necessarily getting it deep. So having Georgiades there as that deeper forward. But overall, I just think the key position stocks for Port Adelaide are worrying. A Marshall, Georgiades, Lukosius forward line, I'm not sure that's good enough. I'm not sure it has the size and physicality to compete with some of those bigger defenders when you come up against the likes of Jacob Wietering. Harry Edwards is going to be emerging this season, Sam Taylor, those types. I think they're going to pick you off a lot, particularly if the team's got multiple interceptors and that sort of thing. If we move to the defenders for Port Adelaide, it's another area where they've lost a lot of players, a lot of running defenders with Dan Houston, one of their best players really going out of the side. So Ali was there. They had to swing Finn Layson back because of the Zerk Thatcher and Asaba Radigalia. Miles Bergman had a pretty good game and was intercepting the football here. But yeah, that's, again, those key position stocks, it just doesn't look like they have the quality. It feels like I'm talking a little bit like I do about North, where it's just not that upper end quality there in the key position stocks and the size is not really there. From a smalls point of view, I think they looked pretty nice coming out of the defensive half. Logan Evans, Kane Farrell, Josh Sin and Ryan Burton were the runners. But again, you look at those names. I mentioned Jace Burgoyne and he was the one that was sort of pushing up onto that wing and playing a little bit higher. I don't know if he has to sort of swing back and help these running defenders just use the ball a little bit better out of D50 because they did turn it over a bit. I think Farrell's a good kick, but I'm not sure if he has the physicality of someone like a Dan Houston who at times would go into the midfield. So that worries me a little bit. Obviously for Port Adelaide, the real area of strength for them is that midfield group. And if they are to do anything meaningful in 2025, it's going to be around Butters, Rosie, Horne-Francis really lighting fire, Willem Drew there to sort of keep that balance together. I think Jordan Sweet would have to have a pretty good year to facilitate what those guys want to do. And then it's about those small forwards. If some of those players like a Joe Berry can have an awesome season like I expect he will, win a Rising Star, Joe Richards goes to another level, Willie Rioli, they can kind of cause some chaos down in that forward half of the ground around Georgiades and Lukosius. And you could be looking at a finals-bound Port Adelaide, but I do see them sliding a little bit with some of the deficiencies that I've mentioned. I think Joe Berry, as I've said multiple times, he's the storyline for me for Port this year is Joe Berry to win the Rising Star. But overall, I just think with those key position players that they've brought in over the last couple of years, they haven't quite got the quality there that they would have hoped, I think, when they traded for some of those players. So that is a wrap for this video, guys. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Can Adelaide win the premiership in 2025? It's probably a long shot, but I think they're a chance with their talent.